I wonder what it's like to fly, to swoop freely among the treetops, and to drink in the world from such glorious heights. Sure, I have wings, but let's face it, they are better at flapping than flying. It takes all my effort just to gain the altitude necessary to reach my 3-foot-tall roost every night. Still, I consider myself lucky. Of all the places in the world, this is a pretty good spot to be grounded. The worms are juicy, the dirt is prime for bathing, and the human beings here are very generous, always providing tasty treats and good neck scratches. I've heard from the crows and other wild birds that humans are not usually so nice. They told me about another place, just a few miles from here, that is full of chickens like me. Legend has it, there are hundreds kept at a time in a single barn. They are kept in those barns like prisoners, unable to feel the sun on their face or the grass under their feet, ever. Not even once. Can you imagine? I don't know if I believe it. Maybe the crows are just trying to scare me. Why else would they claim that not one of these chickens is ever set free? That every single one of them has their neck sliced before the age of 2? I doubt that all those chickens did something so bad that they would make humans that angry. It just doesn't make sense. I turned 5 this year, which is medium old by chicken standards, and I have yet to see a human being kill anybody. Sure, these days I don't get out much, but when I was a chick, I traveled quite a bit, and of all the humans I met, big and small, not one of them was me. All in all, I had a pretty great childhood. My first memories are a little hazy, but I do recall the moment I pecked my way free of my cozy green shell. It was so nice and warm in there, but by the 3rd week I was starting to feel cramped, so it was good to finally stretch out. I imagine baby human beings know the feeling, seeing as they're stuck in those tiny cans. While my hatching memories are a little hazy, here's what I can recall. I barely had time to adjust my eyes to the bright lights, let alone dry off, when things got a bit scary. Out of nowhere, I was grabbed and placed on a cold conveyor belt that took me from one room to the next. At least I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by my brothers and sisters, but they were confused and scared too. I remember it was so loud. In the last room, they separated boys and girls. Where my brothers went, I have no idea. But I do know that my sisters and I were all put in a big cardboard box. Then it was dark for a really long time. We were shuffled around in there for what seemed like an eternity. At least it wasn't as bright, but it was cold, and there was nothing to eat or drink. My sisters were scared and kept crying, but I knew everything would turn out okay. I was one of the smallest, but also one of the bravest. I'm not sure what took them so long, but eventually the human beings figured out we were in that box, and they opened it and gave us food and water. There was another bright light, but it was warm, so I didn't mind too much. I can't even begin to tell you how cold and hungry I was. Some of my sisters were still sleeping when we arrived, and didn't even wake up when the humans lifted us out. In those first few days of my life, things happened so fast. I barely got my belly full before a smiling face appeared above me, and it was my human being, the one who would take care of me my whole life. She gently lifted me and 5 others and wrapped us all in a warm towel. It was the first time I'd felt so cozy since leaving my egg, and, exhausted, I immediately fell asleep. I awoke to a world filled with wonders, what my bean called a normalish chicken childhood. She explained to my sisters and I that we did not belong in factories or in cardboard boxes sent in what she called the mail. We belong outside, hunting bugs, playing in the dirt, and getting warm from snuggles rather than light bulbs. She gave us names, calling me Pimento since I was the smallest. In those early days, our human being was never far away. If we awoke in the middle of the night, she made soft noises so we knew we were safe. We traveled everywhere together, to pottery class and even to the city to visit family. It was one adventure after another, and I loved every minute of it. We learned to follow our foster human across the yard, and she learned how to decipher what we said in chicken. This sound, for example, means we're sleepy. This one means we're hungry. And this is what it sounds like when we're playing keep away with a tasty slug. This happened more often than you'd think, since my sisters and I were always hungry. Makes sense, seeing as we grew so fast. It wasn't long before my fluff was replaced by feathers. At the dawn of adolescence, life as I knew it was pretty much perfect. Carefree days spent relaxing, playing, and exploring. Then, one afternoon, out of the blue, everything changed. By now, my human being would leave us alone for short periods of time, seeing as we were practically teenagers. We weren't really alone anyhow. We were friends with beans, rabbits, parrots, dogs, everybody really. One day, one of those dogs, Lily, decided she didn't want us around anymore. Maybe she was jealous of all the attention we were getting. I don't know what sparked it. But I know how the fire ended, with the bodies of my sisters, dead and dying, scattered across the yard. I was the smallest, but also the bravest, and the only one to survive. When my human being came home, she was devastated. I could tell she blamed herself. It took a long time for us both to recover, and the nightmares were relentless. Although I was independent as far as chickens go, we're social creatures and don't like to be alone. My bean did her best to spend most of the day outside with me, but it was not the same as having other chickens around. Fortunately, she quickly found some feathered flock mates from a local farm. Being local meant these chickens did not have to be scared by a conveyor belt or a cardboard box or by being in the mail or anything. After all we'd been through, everything finally seemed like it was back on track. But looks can be deceiving. In a matter of hours, I could tell that some of my new brothers and sisters were not feeling well. They seemed tired and wouldn't eat. Coccidiosis is what my bean called it, and she reassured me that I had been immunized against this disease, that it's standard practice at industrial scale hatcheries. I guess for all its bad sides, there are some good things that come with big automated operations like the place where I was born. The older I get, the more I can see that the world is neither purely black nor white. Compared to the light and carefree moments of my early childhood, those weeks were a dark time for my flock. First was the dog attack, and now an assault from within. It was only a matter of days before all but a few of my new family members succumbed to the disease and passed away. Some were less than a week old, barely a taste of life. I still wonder what they would be doing today were things to have turned out differently. It turns out there was another downside to avoiding commercial hatcheries, at least in terms of control. The issue of straight-run chicks versus pullets, the industry terms for co-ed babies rather than just girls. You see, 2 of my new flock mates were brothers, and things were fine up until puberty, but then they kept fighting over us. Decimated by dogs and disease, our flock was not big enough to sustain the desires of 2 amorous young roosters, and the result was a lot of tension in the flock and feathers ripped out during scuffles. We ladies had to wear chicken saddles to protect our backs, and, realizing this female-to-male ratio was not sustainable long-term, my human being let us choose which guy to keep around. Robin was a bit scragglier, and his crow was not as manly, but he was much better at courtship. In the presence of food, rather than eat it himself, he would start tidbitting, a courtship display that cemented his generous reputation. While rarely did Robin keep a morsel for himself, the other rooster, Lavender, selfishly gobbled up any and all food. Though Lavender was handsome, the choice was clear, for chivalry over brawn is the key to a chicken's heart. Lavender's profile was put online, complete with baby photos and a plea that it be kind, not hungry human beings who adopt him. Last I heard, he had settled in with a group of ladies just a few miles down the road after their previous rooster lost his life defending the flock. I'm glad it worked out because I could tell my human felt like she'd somehow betrayed him, but it had to happen. Things as they were not sustainable. After Lavender left, things were peaceful for a long time. I loved to watch the wild birds raise families, and I got to know the rhythm of the seasons. I discovered my hate for snow, which covered up all my favorite dirt patches and scared the bugs away. Then, late last spring, we had a new bird join our flock, and I remember thinking he was the strangest chicken I had ever seen. I found out later he was not a chicken at all, but rather a species of parrot called a blue and gold macaw. He proved to be a master of languages, able to speak chicken, parrot, and even human. He told me his name was Luca, though he never explained why he wore such bright colors. You see, we birds can detect more colors than beans can. We can see ultraviolet light. If Luca looks like a sparkler to you, to us he lights up like a full-blown firework. Between his luminous feathers and his loud talking, Luca definitely didn't seem too concerned with blending in and staying under the radar, which can be dangerous, particularly with eagles flying around. It wasn't long after Luca joined our flock that we learned this the hard way. Early one morning, a ginormous bald eagle swooped down and attacked us chickens. It was 3 feet tall and had a wingspan twice that size. I could hardly believe my eyes, and looking back on it, it still feels surreal. Still, the dog I fought off was even bigger, so I mustered all my courage to scare it away. While the rest of my sisters hid in the bushes, Robin and I stood bravely in the middle of the yard, sounding the alarm and keeping an eye on those massive talons. Unfortunately, the incident did not leave my flock unscathed. Marshmallow was fatally injured, and another young hen named Wolf was carried away. From time to time, that eagle still flies over, but Robin keeps out a sharp eye, and when he sees anything suspicious, he sounds the alarm and we all duck for cover. Other members of my family also keep vigilant. If hawks or eagles come close, my human being and Luca make a racket so loud that no bird of prey in their right mind would come close. I once asked Luca why he was not afraid of eagles. He told me that he was afraid, but that he'd lived long enough to know that there were worse things to fear, including living a life overprotected. He said he'd met parrots before who were never allowed to leave their cages, all because their human beings were afraid of what would happen. It made me think of all those chickens trapped in barns. If the crows were right, and humans kept them in there to collect and eat their eggs, I wondered if that meant parrot eggs were also on the menu. Luca then explained that, like birds, fear also comes in many colors. While I feared most the thought of being eaten, whether by dog, eagle, or disease, he feared loneliness the most. You see, parrots live a long time, 10 times that of chickens, long enough to lose partners whose companionship was supposed to last a lifetime. This was Luca's third home, and he was terrified by the prospect of a fourth. Once I got to know him, I came to realize that this strange technicolor bird had more in common with me than we had apart. For one, we were both culturally bilingual, able to communicate in both bird and human. We also shared the same dream of flying among the treetops. But an old injury had broken his left wing. I don't know how it happened exactly. He didn't want to talk about it. But every once in a while I would catch him flapping with his good arm and fantasizing that he'd suddenly achieve liftoff. I also came to realize that some aspects of his injury were invisible, at least from the outside. About every 2 weeks, when the light was a certain way or he'd not had enough sleep, Luca would have a paralyzing seizure. It often followed the same pattern. He would lift his right wing, clench his right foot, and begin vomiting through guttural cries, pupils dilated. My human being did everything she could to help. Just as she had deciphered our calls as baby chickens, she learned to spot a seizure coming, and as the days passed, got better at minimizing the magnitude and duration of these episodes. Still, I could tell it took a toll on both of them. He trapped in a body that transported him against his will to a painful, powerless place, and she desperately calling his name in an effort to bring him back to us. I think what was key was that they spent a lot of time building their friendship. Without having to worry so much about the possibility of a fourth home, Luca began to relax, and his seizures began to lessen their grip, though they never let go entirely. From what Luca told me about other humans he'd met, I discovered we had another thing in common. For whatever reason, I've noticed that human beings, especially those without birds in their flock, seem to have a hard time seeing us. Their vision is fine, that's not the problem. It's seeing through our outsides to who we are inside, seeing our personalities. For example, most new humans I meet ask first about my body. They ask about my eggs a lot, what color they are, and how often I lay them. To be honest, they only seem concerned with those parts of me from the neck down. They don't ask what I like to talk about or what I think of things. In fact, they don't ask me anything. They ask my human being. Luca said for him, the opposite is true. When he first meets new beings, they do talk to him, but usually just about talking. They hardly ever ask about his body, how it feels, or about his heart's most amorous desires. In fact, if he does bring up his love life, they discourage it. I find it strange that as far as meeting humans goes, we seem to be on opposite sides of the same coin. Here's another example. Lots of beans talk about how Luca is exotic and wild, like he is some international man of mystery. But he lives inside the house, does laundry, watches TV, listens to music, and eats dinner with humans. How much more domestic can you get? Meanwhile, we chickens are labeled domesticated, even though we live outside and socialize mostly with our own kind, just like our wild ancestors did. Sure, over the centuries our bodies have been shaped by humans. I mean, just look at ducks. But our minds are just as they ever were, concerned primarily with survival in the great outdoors, the wild. Why can't human beings see that Luca and I can be both wild and domestic at the same time? Beans are both at the same time, aren't they? And don't let those flashy feathers fool you. Luca's parents may have known how to survive in the jungle, but just like me, he was purchased in a store. Receipt and everything. Fortunately for Luca and I, the humans in our flock are pretty good at seeing all of us, who we are both inside and out. They can tell what we are feeling, even when we try to hide it. We birds don't like the world to know what we're feeling, particularly if that feeling is ill. I think it's a hang-up we have related to our fear of being eaten. So when I started to not feel well, I didn't tell anybody, but my human being noticed. One afternoon not too long ago, I suddenly lost my appetite and felt extremely tired. I still had an insatiable thirst, but I noticed that my body was not digesting. The fluids would just build up in my crop. It got so bad that when I bent over, liquid came spilling out. Everyone in my flock was worried about me. My bean took me to the veterinarian and he emptied my crop and tested my blood. Based on what he saw, he said I would not survive the night. But even though I was once the smallest, I am also the bravest. Not only did I survive the night, I survived the week. The vet could hardly believe it. I was given yucky medication that made my face sticky, and daily baths in case the warm water would help pass any egg that might be stuck. That's what happened to Coco a couple years ago. She had an ectopic egg that was trapped inside her body, and within days, it killed her. Maybe that's why human beings are so obsessed with our eggs. While I didn't feel anything egg-shaped in me, I dutifully played the role of patient, each day tolerating meds, baths, and blow-dries. In a way, it was kinda nice to be back in the house and sleeping near my human being, just like I had when I was little. I'm still amazed by all that's happened in the years since, all the obstacles I've overcome. I have successfully fended off dogs, eagles, and even diseases, but in the end it was my own body that I couldn't fight. I passed peacefully in my sleep, close to where I slept all those years ago with my baby sisters. The autopsy revealed what the tests could not, that there was an infected egg yolk that had spread throughout my body, effectively shutting down my digestive tract and eventually my lungs, heart, and other organs. Given the diagnosis, that I survived as long as I did is nothing short of miraculous. But then again, would you expect any less from a brave bird like me? I find it ironic that it was yoke that brought me into this world and yoke that took me out of it, like yellow bookends on a life well lived. Time is limited for all of us. The best we can do is live without regrets. I was buried near my coop between the roots of a magnificent pine tree, the same one that gave me shade in the summer and shielded me from winter's freezing winds. Lest you feel sorry for me, know I got my wish. I no longer wonder what it's like to fly among the treetops. I am the treetops, every bit as much a part of my flock as the day I broke free from that shell.